It's going to run. We will have staff go through the options as recommended in the report. They will just speak to those. And then really it becomes our time in terms of debate. I am intending to call for a mover of resolutions, I think they're A, B and F, which are receiving the report, noting the staff recommendations, and then F is about engaging with our regional partners in central government. And at that opportunity, members will have the time within standing orders to speak to what they've heard this morning. I expect it to be very frank. I expect it to be some stylist that he has something that he wishes to move. Councillor Clout, you've got a question.
Thank you. You mentioned sort of A, B and F, and then a discussion and a debate, and then C to E, but presumably the substantive debate will be C to E rather than A, B and F?
That'll be up to members.
Okay,
It just gives them an opportunity to speak a reasonable amount of time within the constraints of standing orders. Councillor Baldock.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. That's very good procedure. Just foreshadowing that in what I do move, it may have a small shift in the differential, in which case I wouldn't mind having, before we get to it, if we could have Nigel Tutt come back from Priority 1 to give his view of how the business community might react.
I think we can certainly do that. I think, in fact, that might be, if Nigel's around? Okay, because what we could do is then perhaps actually the same way we approached Matt Cowley is we can ask him questions and he can respond to those. So, getting on with the agenda, Paul, you were about to wrap up your presentation and then go through some options, I believe.
Yeah, Christine will just cover off, summarising some of the NZI work.
Just to pop back to this, so just in terms of the shortfall in housing supply, so the two columns there, current dwelling projections, that's what the Veros and the TCC work came up with. And just before Christmas, we got the updated census information. What that told us was two key things. One is that we have been experiencing for a number of years, and the NIDIA, which is the National Institute of Demographic and Economic Analysis Research, who provide our projections, they've said that the number of people per household is decreasing over time. This census is the first time we've actually seen the number of people per household increasing, so we surmise that's because of the house prices and people having to change their the way that they live and who they live with to share costs more broadly. And the other thing is we've always had around about a 10% vacancy factor across our cities. So those are homes that are vacant, either holiday homes or others. We're also seeing that vacancy factor dropping. So what we've done is taken that information and modified the dwelling projections. So you've seen the shortfall because we're going to need less houses because more people are living in them, and ones that were previously vacant now have people living in them. So the shortfall will be less. But actually in terms of the numbers of people will be greater. So and the demand on our water and wastewater networks and our transport networks is actually driven predominantly by the number of people. But our revenue base is based on the number of rateable units, which obviously for residential is dwellings. So the number of dwellings, our rating base divisor is decreasing, but the number of people is increasing. So we're looking at that 600 shortfall in the 3 years. It's unlikely we'll be able to address that in that time frame. So just in terms of, it's really just trying to summarise there what NZIER said. So significant impact, the 1 to 3 year is extremely difficult to reverse in the timeframes we've got. The 4 to 10 year is reversible, or we can change the direction based on bringing land supply and bringing infrastructure on board over the next 3 years. So that's $272 million GDP foregone, a loss in employment for construction around about the 400, and a 61,000 odd per annum median house price increase for each of the next 3 years. So, and as we said before, that relates to when you come to the prioritisation, you'll see that we've talked about infrastructure to provide for currently zoned land. That currently zoned land is in the assumed housing supply, if you prioritise any of that out, that will increase the number of houses shortfall. And there's also expenditure that is in the next 3 years to provide for the 4 to 10 year supply, so that when we get to that point, the infrastructure is in the ground and ready to go to provide for that housing supply. If you exercise your prerogative to prioritise some of those things out, we just wanted to really just draw your attention to what some of the economic impacts were as advised by NZIER.
Any questions? No.
Okay, so the next section really starts to move into the options that we have presented in the report. Go through this very, very quickly. I think we've covered most of it already, but obviously the need to prioritise CapEx, and I'll work through what staff have recommended in terms of some of those prioritisations in a moment relative to the options. The risks and how we actually fund our risk reserve and capacity, the conversation about obtaining more revenue and leveraging those conversations at a central government and a regional government level, and ensuring that the annual plan is best placed to actually have those conversations. And as I keep on saying, not one solution will actually resolve this. It's a matter of multiple solutions. Probably goes without saying, prioritisation is very challenging, and really what we're saying with that is those issues around housing supply and affordability and transport are absolutely critical, and that started the day in the vital signs information, but the reality is that some of the areas through some of those options actually start to impact on some zoned land, which obviously has further impacts on housing supply and affordability. In terms of prioritisation, this is attachment 1 to your agenda, just to explain how staff did the first review of that. We took the view that renewals, we want to look after our existing assets, so renewals were included within the base numbers in terms of being included. The growth numbers, there was some reduction of 7 million which has been deferred based largely around timing, so that's where some of that number comes from. And then level of service, where there wasn't, in the red down the bottom, an immediate impact or their alternatives, there were some deferrals put in that. So that 36 million effectively totals, I think, attachment 4 of your report in terms of the methodology that was used to actually make those decisions around the prioritisation of those capital projects. Just to recap, sure, annual plan obviously can't solve it, but it's about those elements: prioritisation of CapEx, the revenue levels, the debt levels, critical engagement with the community and critical engagement with other partners, and pretty much we've started the development of the long-term plan already, but that continues. We do more work around the vital signs and the strategy going forward. Into the long-term plan, we really need to pick up on some of those regional and national alternatives. Otherwise, if we go back to the prioritising and increasing revenue, that conversation becomes harder without those alternatives being delivered. Okay, so the options, just a couple of assumptions that were made within them. So like I said, we'd taken 36 million out through that prioritisation list, was the first one. For the reasons previously mentioned, or mentioned this morning, around sitting at 225%. In terms of a ratio, the $30 million financing adjustment, so in the past, this is a number that what we've done is we've said that there are significant challenges around the program and we're not going to finance it all. In the past, it's been as high as 70 million. We've brought it right back because the type of projects that exist mean that it would be very risky to actually increase that much beyond that number. Operational expenditure levels will need to be recut depending on where we sit. A lot of that will flow into the following year though, particularly on the capital program. Spoken about revenue levels and the structural change. Obviously there's one that's referred to in the report in terms of a movement in the UAGC, but there are others that can be referred to. Just to go through very quickly, if there are any questions, this is really just explaining the options, so I'll just go through it quite quickly unless there are further questions on it. The first one is consistent with the December resolution, which is a 3.9% residential mean increase, 5.1 in total. That effectively means you've got $179 million of capital available. We've got a total list of 248 at the moment if you add them all together. We've already suggested to defer 36, so we need to find another 33 million under that option to sit at 225%. Does that make sense? What it looks like from a rates perspective is that you'd have a BAU rate of 1.4. Now, attachment, not sure which one. One of the attachments shows the costs that have been removed to actually bring that number down. Is still quite a large gap between what's in our system at the moment and getting to that gap. So that list totalled 950,000, and we need to remove several more million to get that down to 1.4. So we would need to do further work if that was an option that we wanted to go down. The other rates remain constant throughout the options, being waters at 2.1, transport and planning at 1.5, and the other targeted a small 1.1 increase. So option 2 then is 7.6, so that's currently what we've actually got in our system. Basically means that you need a further 24 million to come out of that compared to the previous 33 million. And the 36 would remain deferred from a rates level. Your BAU is the variable in that, which goes back to 3.9%. So we've actually, that's the one we've got effectively sitting in our system at this point in time. The third one, this introduces debt management as the difference, and it gives the ability to add back in 6 million of the $36 million deferred. And then option 4, basically it gives you the ability to put the bulk of that 36 million back into the annual plan and remain at 225%. So that's the key options if we want to pause and have conversation on.
Questions? Councillor Baldock.
So just clarifying, Paul, in the recommended resolutions which have the little X's in them, C approves the 2021 capital program of X. The option 4 is then the number you just had on the slide before there. It is option 4 is
244.
244. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Are we waiting, or are we going to have a presentation about the issues of after these questions, about the differential and how that might affect things?
So Jim has those numbers. If we want to go through those, we can actually go through those numbers in terms of the impacts on differential.
Okay, I'll just roll through some remaining questions, and then perhaps if we can talk about the differential before Nigel Tutt arrives. Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, just a quick question on the options analysis, increase rates only, or the rate your way out of this. I think it's paragraph 150. Does that include that $500 million or $1 billion? So
Sorry, it's based on what we have in the system at this point in time, which is the $500 million. So it would need to be and I think what you'd see, the number would reflect higher in terms of, in that option we say significant increases in the first 2 years and then 5% average after that. Those numbers would more than likely, as we do a long-term plan, increase in those later years as we get more of that capital program in for later years.
okay, so I think so over those 3 years, that's like a 56% rates increase, and you're saying over 3 years it's probably going to be more than that if we try to only use rates as a lever.
Correct.
Councillor Robson.
Yeah, 2 questions, if I may, Chair. First, following on from Councillor Arbery's question around paragraph 150. In paragraph 150, it says 2022-23 onwards, approximately 5%. It's then caveated heavily by paragraph 151. Is it possible to get whatever numbers we know out for at least the next 10 years? And the reason I ask that is we're supposed to have 30-year asset management programs. Most of our issues seems to come about because of CapEx. Most of that CapEx seems to relate to growth. The earlier slide showed that if we didn't have growth, we wouldn't have a problem, which is an interesting philosophical debate. But is it possible to get those solid numbers further out? Because surely to put from 2022, 23 onwards, approximately 5%, to put those numbers in a public report suggests, well, A, that some people might buy that 5% ongoing from now, or that perhaps we don't know what our year 3, year 4, year 5 numbers are. So is there any way of getting something more solid in that space, other than the caveat in 151?
We do have numbers. I think the important thing with those numbers is that they are a number of years old. They were done through the long-term plan, which includes the 30-year infrastructure program, and we've seen significant increases in that. So I would be very uncomfortable saying with any certainty that there are solid numbers into those future years, except to say that what numbers we have in there will more than likely increase.
I could just add to that. So over the last couple of years, the council has made additional investment in growth planning and growth planning resources. There's a whole lot of work being done in terms of updating our water and wastewater models and our transport models. We're working on inputting the data into those to have the information for the long-term plan. There's a substantive project underway in terms of resilience, so there's some holding numbers in the LTP, but the resilience project is underway to understand what investments might be sensible in terms of resilience, and then clearly there's a prioritisation process, and you've also got the Tauranga system plan underway in the transport space. That's undoubtedly going to deliver a large number of projects of substantive costs that need to be prioritised. So at the moment we know all of those streams of work are underway. They're running on a schedule to flow into decision making for this council as part of the LTP, but we cannot quantify them at this point.
Supplementary, Councillor Robson?
Yeah, I think critical for us, and I think for communication with our community, is that from what I hear you saying, our previous systems have been unable to deliver, for whatever reason, reliable forecasts, and part of the situation we find ourselves in is a result of those systems being unable to deliver reliable numbers, albeit in a changing environment. I realise the risk. When will we get numbers that you would be happy to describe as solid, or around which you could put the risk profiles? Because we need those numbers probably within 3 months, because it seems to me that this entire process suggests that we strike the rate by June 30, and in July 1 we are deep into our long-term plan process, trying to produce those numbers that Gary Webber, for instance, wants us to commit to. When will we have those numbers?
Chair, a number of parts to that question. I think one of the questions that I think Councillor Robson asked this morning effectively was the amount of some of these cost increases that are driven internally and externally, and the bulk of the ones that we saw on the screen were actually from external factors. So that there is a huge element of that that's going to play out on that long-term plan, and we need to do that exercise properly. We've already started the long-term plan work, but we won't get that level of planning until later, towards the end of this calendar year, in terms of what that looks like. We don't breach our numbers in the first year. We start to run into those real breaches in the following year. So we just get very tight this year, effectively, in terms of some of that. So yes, there are some deficiencies in terms of those numbers because we haven't done a long-term plan process yet, and we need to do that. The other piece of work that's important to that is going on from that vital signs work in terms of that engagement with the community about some of those key priorities that needs to form the basis of that long-term plan. So there's quite a number of pieces of work to get through to actually enable that.
Final, if I may, to the chief, through the chair to the chief executive, a perennial. Do you have the resources to deliver the quality of numbers that the governance of this community requires to make solid decisions for our long-term plan? I can repeat the question if it's not clear.
Look, I think we need to bring in more resource actually to continue to refine the numbers that we're providing for you. Likewise, in terms of alternate funding options and opportunities that exist in the wider sub-region, we would need the support of, I think, independent and external experts to guide us through that process. So.
Finally, if I may, with the indulgence of the chair, is the budget for that resource in what we're currently looking at?
given the criticality of this issue, we are looking the best we can to reallocate, but it will be a stretch to be able to do it within the existing budgets.
Okay, thank you. We have some additional information in terms of the differential. If we could present that now. And then I understand Councillor Baldock, perhaps if you could lead off with a question to Nigel Tuck from Priority 1, and then we may have some other questions. I think it would be good for Nigel to hear the differential information as well, given that's likely to be what the questions are about.
Sorry, through the chair, it's just running off the printer as we speak, so, sorry.
We can take.
I think unless we could have a general conversation around the principle of it.
I'd prefer to have a conversation understanding orders at this time, but perhaps for the use of time, Councillor Baldock, you had a question of Nigel Tuck. Would you like to start that now?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thank you, Nigel. We've seen this morning what we're going to be calling the clout report for some time, I think. But whilst it shows that the average or the mean residential rate is the highest or one of the highest in the metros, we also see this huge disparity between the other metros and their commercial differentials. So there may be a mood here to look at, as we did 2 years ago, begin an incremental change to that. And you remember that we had a bit of a pushback from that. But so if we added from one, we're sitting at the moment, we're going to be sitting at the moment at 1.2 at the end of this annual plan. If we added in to 1.3, another 0.1% of a change in that to try and shift this burden around the community. What do you think the commercial ratepayers of the city, how they're going to cope with that? We asked the Chamber before. It's now Priority 1's turn to give us your view, please.
Thanks, Harry. So how about I just give a general kind of what I think about rates differentials and how we could approach it. So in general, I think businesses over the longer period of time will be open to a discussion on that, and as you, I can only half see the numbers before, but it looks like there's a good potential for a chat around that, right? So that should be fine. I think it's going to be really, really crucial that you can bring businesses in this area along with you. So the narrative and the story around that's really important. Your big risk here is that if it's seen as, oh, well, there's a whole bunch of other problems, they're hard to sort out, this is an easy one, or we are going to blame businesses for a poor rating system that's been done in the past, then you'll struggle, right? So a lot of it is how we can convince people in the right way. I would urge that it's viewed as a 10 or 20 year thing rather than an immediate fix as well. Only for the reason it's much easier to talk about in those circumstances, much less of a surprise for people. So bear that in mind. What else? I think you'd also want to, if you're talking the specific year, you'd probably want to be able to talk to businesses about what other options have been ruled in or out as well. So getting assets or debt off the balance sheet, selling things, other rating options, government help, that type of thing. So you wouldn't want it to be perceived as this is just one thing and we're going to attack you for it. And the other thing is I would be very, very wary of the current environment, right? So you have, while our economy is traditionally thought of as quite buoyant, you do have a coronavirus in the system at the moment, and your biggest ratepayer has just reduced its earnings guidance. So I would have thought that probably wouldn't equate to the ideal time to go there with cap in hand asking for more money. That was a long answer to that question, Larry, but hopefully it's helpful.
Yep, supplementary, Councillor Baldock.
So, but we're caught with two things, Nigel. One is, if we don't put something in the draft, we can't talk about it. It doesn't mean we can't pull it out, but if we don't put it in, can't have that conversation. Secondly, by the time we strike the rate, the impacts or the high point of the coronavirus crisis may well have gone. So we can't sort of make decisions on that because we're talking about July through for another year. So any comments about that, please?
Yeah, again, it'll be the narrative that's really important and the story and how you go about it. So I'm not sure how the process works, but you just need to bear that in mind. And we don't know what coronavirus will do. So yeah, it may not be ideal right now, may be good in 3 months, may be terrible in 3 months, we don't know. Yeah.
Other questions? Councillor Hughes.
I'm just wondering, I mean, the narrative around cap in hand isn't really relevant in terms of our growth and what we're trying to, and how much money we need to spend in order to facilitate things like the port to exist. And I'm just wondering, what do you think of the differentials currently, that how far out we are compared to other cities in our differentials here for residential versus commercial, and how we could frame that conversation with our commercial ratepayers?
Thanks, Heidi. So it'll all come down to what you get for that money, and that's where I think we failed last time, is we weren't good enough about explaining, yes, yeah, I think it was 1.6 we needed to go to. We just simply couldn't get across what they got for that. So if we can develop a really good way of saying, hey, you need us to free up additional housing so that can allow you to continue to get talent. We saw that report before from NZIER, which means we actually have quite serious damage to the economy from lack of housing. So there's plenty of stuff that we could do to help get that right, which I think would make it a good proposition.
Additional questions? Councillor Robson.
I think, Nigel, you make a very good point. From memory, the last time we started a long-term plan process, the sort of headline issues in the public debate weren't around things that the commercial sector was probably too heavily invested in, like transport systems where there's an obvious nexus, or as you say, accommodation for talent where there's an obvious nexus. Instead, the public debate was consumed a little bit by, I think, the nice to haves is a phrase that's often used, much heat and light around things like museums and stuff, which was slightly off topic. Do you think, and here comes the question, there's been a tendency in the past not to understand within the commercial sector the fact that the model that Tauranga has been using was doomed eventually to fail? Or do you think they chose to go blind on it because they weren't paying? So did they not understand, or did they understand but go blind on it? Because it's been self-evident to those of us who can use a calculator for a number of years, and we've been saying so, and I'm surprised the commercial sector hasn't sort of spoken sooner.
Thanks, John. Look, I think they're all very concerned about the lack of provision for infrastructure for the city, and have been urging the city over the course of time to do stuff about that. I think the line's drawn in terms of you can't expect the business community to articulate your plan for you. So TCC has to be able to do that, and that's no criticism of anyone or anything like that. It's just what it is, right? So that's why I think they'll be all open to a discussion, because as you say, it's relatively plain to see. But TCC will need to be the ones who have access to a lot of the information that others don't, will need to be the ones who articulate the plan.
I think we're happy to share.
Further questions? No, they're being done. Thank you for coming back, Nigel, to answer those questions. And appreciate you have a deadline. You may wish to be entertained with the debate. We'll be kicking that off shortly. Paul, we've had a spreadsheet delivered to us here. Before we close this part of proceedings and get into debate, do you just want to introduce what we have in front of us here?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So what Jim has put together is a number of options. Well, fundamentally, in addition to what was in the agenda, the two that have been added in are to increase the differential from the proposed 1.2 to 1.3 and a further option to go to 1.4. Together, so they're showing effectively the impact on the various quartiles and medians at both the UAGC level of 15 and 10%. I think it's important to note that the 10% will also have an impact on elements of the commercial sector, but more at the higher end. So, as Nigel points out, the major shareholder, the largest ratepayer effectively will be impacted by that as well in terms of the reduction of the UHGC from 15 to 10.
Thank you for that. Okay, colleagues, we'll now move into debate if there's no questions. Councillor Robson and Councillor Bullock, do you have questions?
Yeah, just in relation to the spreadsheets that you've given us here, it would have been helpful, and I appreciate there's a calculation to do, whether these potential positions in the matrix flowed through into a what does that now mean the commercial share is. Just in terms of giving some guidance about whether what we see as a significant increase makes a significant dent in the, I think I calculated it on the basis of the clout numbers as $49 million annual deficit.
You may wish to make that very valid point in debate.
The question is, can we have the number? Can that be produced by staff? Too hard?
Jim? I think on the fly, yes, we can certainly bring it back, but...
No, thank you.
So Baldock, question?
It's just an assistance, I hope, because people were looking at 3 or 4 pages here. If I can just foreshadow that the proposed motion I would put forward would be dealing with on the pages here the option 3 with the limited debt management of 5, but the differential at 1.3. So if you look at that column and the one over the page with the commercial, that's what we'll be needing to give our attention to initially. And then there may be questions flowing from that. So it's kind of page 1, 2, it's page 2 really, and the other, well, page 3 if you're counting the back side, but page 2, the front and back, and it's option 3 down through that column there. The middle column is the one that we would be dealing with in the proposed resolution, if I can.
Yeah, thank you for foreshadowing that, Councillor Baldock. Just as we go into debate, just bear in mind that I'm going to invite somebody to move A, B and F, and then I'll invite Councillor Baldock to move his resolutions. What that means, which might be slightly different to what we're used to, is that essentially members may have 2 goes at speaking, and that's a very important thing to remember when comments are made. Comments might come back when somebody else has their second turn at speaking. So members might want to keep that in mind. Can I please have a mover for A, B and F? Councillor Clout. Can I have a seconder for that? Mayor Tenby Powell. Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Clout, do you wish to speak?
Thank you.
The motion?
I'm only going to speak once, so I'm just going to save that until the substantive motion. So this is quite just really housekeeping in my view, A, B and F, so I'll just leave it at that.
Do have a right of reply. Mayor Powell.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reinforce serial F as being of the most critical of importance and not to be underestimated under any circumstances, that our regional partners, our relationship with them, and I include central government in that, are going to be critical to how we move forward as a sub-region, which ultimately may lift into being a wider region or inter-regional, in fact, with the Waikato. If we are going to solve these problems for Tauranga City as an epicentre of a major geography of New Zealand's economic powerhouse, we need to think way more strategically than we have been in the past in this city, and I commend that F is going to be very important as a part of our thinking around regional partnerships and partnerships with other regions and central government. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Powell. Other speakers, Councillor Robson, then Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, I will support the motion. However, it will become a matter of record, the following words. I'm concerned about the quality of the content of the report, and the answer I got to the previous question about the resourcing of the machine that provides us with the information we need to make quality decisions, that we will be shuffling things around internally, but there's some risk we'll still be slightly under-resourced, concerns me greatly, right? I think, given the size of decisions we're making, we need to make sure that we are certain that we have the best quality information. We shouldn't be taking risk in that regard. And the fact that the report itself did not identify that risk, that the machine itself is under-resourced, and did not make clearly a requirement or a request for additional funding, concerns me. I'm not certain that we've yet fully, all of us, understood the situation we're in, the gravity of it, and the quality of information we will need to make good decisions to take to our community. So I will support the motion, but...
Councillor Arbery, you were next.
Just like to foreshadow under Councillor or Deputy Mayor Baldock's foreshadowing that I'll make an amendment to that. I did want to say under recommendation F, which is to assess and review further opportunities to address council's funding challenges with central government, regional and local government partners and other growth councils. In my amendment, and what I'll be arguing for today, is going to put a lot of trust in Mayor Tenby and Mayor Webber. They've made statements, which is largely what my views fallen towards around central government will go to the party if we take a first step. So just wanted that put out there, that is a big reason for voting the way that I will do later today.
Additional speakers? I'm going to dip my toe in the water here because fully acknowledging that my colleagues will then have the ability to speak to the next resolution, but speaking to the thing in total, I do want to thank staff and Councillor Clout, Councillor Robson for the provision of that information around the average residential rates and the average commercial rates as it relates to the major centres. I think possibly for the first time since I've been here, we have on this issue a shared piece of evidence which we can then debate from one way or the other. But we're not arguing past each other. I think we can argue and discuss with each other. We've got a shared piece of evidence to go on, and that's really important, that's significant. I would suggest that the evidence tells me that as Tauranga is already one of the highest in New Zealand in terms of average residential rates, we are higher than Hamilton, Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin. And certainly we are giving the Auckland Unitary Authority, which is a council which is both a regional council and a territorial authority, a real good run for their money in terms of heading towards the highest rating council in New Zealand in terms of average residential rates. What that tells me is that our residential ratepayers are more than stepping up, more than showing the appropriate level of courage. They've been funding this city for years, and we've actually run out of runway to hit them anymore. And I think we need to be really aware of that fact. The media briefing last week, one of the comments was made that for properties which are at the higher end of value, that perhaps those owners who have lower income but higher value properties might wish to consider selling those properties and downsizing them to get smaller properties and therefore have to pay less rates. Look, I was at a Probus earlier this week, and that put the fear of God into these people. You know, we shouldn't be talking like that, in my view. So we've run out of runway in terms of average residential rates. So we need to look at what other tools are in the toolbox. I don't see any of the particular staff recommendations that are before us. I don't think that they give us a robust testing of what those other tools are at this time. I think that we need to step back, we need to look at the differential, we need to look at user fees and charges, we need to look at CapEx reduction, that's capital expenditure reduction, and the differential, of course. We need to look at those, not on the fly today, by just pulling a number out in terms of what will go to our commercial community with. We need to have a report on that and to have some evidence for that discussion. Too early, in my view, to be pulling those numbers out. Now, in terms of the Western Bay of Plenty District Council, that is a wrong comparison for us. Tauranga is a city. You must compare us with the cities. And as I have already said, we're going to give Auckland a run for their money. Auckland is currently the highest, and we're going to really give them a run for their money. Western Bay would be more comparable to South Wairarapa District Council. Let's not compare apples and bananas on this one, folks. That is all I will say on this matter now. Hopefully I have spurred some further debate, and I do acknowledge, having now dipped my toe in the water, colleagues will be able to have a right of reply to that when we come to the next resolution. So I do support A, B and F. Other speakers? Yeah, that's relatively straightforward, isn't it? Right of reply, Councillor Clout.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that a certain other councillor will effectively right of reply you your comments shortly. I mean, I also want to say I probably undercooked my comments on F, because certainly I don't want to underestimate how important it is that we continue to work with central, regional government and also our other growth councils. So that's, you know, we heard about that earlier talking to Infrastructure New Zealand. So I think we're all on the same page there. Thank you.
Thank you. Right of reply being exercised, I will now put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye and raise your hand. Councillor Morris, Councillor Baldock, Councillor Arbery, Councillor Salisbury, Councillor Robson, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Granger, Councillor Clout, Councillor Kitty, Councillor Hollis and Mayor Powell. I declare it carried unanimously. Those matters being dealt with. Is there somebody prepared to move something relating to the rest of the recommendations?
Yes,
Councillor Baldock.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to move C, D and E. C will be the numbers being inserted in C. If we could have it up, do we want to have it up on the screen so we can insert? Yeah, I'll pause. I do begin to speak. You might assist with the clock starting for me. You know how I have a tendency to go over the time. So we'll be looking at C, approves the capital program of 244 million and associated rates revenue increase of 12.6%. D recognises a rates increase of 12.6% is made up of the business as usual general rate of 3.9%, waters 2.1%, growth and transport planning 1.5%, debt management 5%, and other to reflect decisions made during the meeting to add operating expenditure, it needs to be 0.1. That gives us a total, if my math is correct, of 12.6. I should pause and let the mathematicians in the room check that out. I think, is that correct, Paul?
We have confirmation that that is a correct series of numbers. Yes, Mayor Powell, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Oh, Mayor Powell is happy to second
Okay,
that resolution, so you may speak to it.
Well, I know then there's E to still fill in
sure.
as well.
Thank
Sorry.
you. No, thank you.
Approves a further amendment to the rating structure by reducing the uniform annual general charge to 10%, and then we add a further increase in the commercial differential to 1.3.
It is being typed live. Mayor Powell is the seconder to that resolution. That is the complete resolution. I invite you now to speak to it, Councillor Baldock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, before you go, it's not 1.3%, just to clarify.
Oh, sorry, yeah, just 1.3. Yeah. Thank you. And you're on.
Thank you. So the first thing to say is thank you to the staff for the enormous amount of work. I think this is one of the best processes that I've been through in an annual plan or an LTP, where we've been getting a lot of good information and being able to work things through. It is a draft, and we always go out to consult with the community with the draft. This is not necessarily going to be the final figures, but I have always taken seriously in my time on council to look at the recommendations staff make. We ask them to do an awful lot of work. They come back and lay things out for us with various options, but they make recommendations. And the recommendations in this case was to be between option 3 and 4. What I'm proposing is basically the capital expenditure of option 4, but we do take out the 5% additional debt management, so that we do keep it down to the 12.6%, which I think is prudent. I think the additional 5% can be managed in the next LTP. We will have to look at it, obviously, because we can't allow that debt to revenue ratio to change too much, but I think we can still get through. If it goes up to 235%, we still have some headroom for the next year, but it definitely needs to be addressed going forward through the LTP process. It is a business as usual at 3.9, and that's made up, of course, of that inflation plus rates, plus the cap of 2%. But I would point out that, of course, the inflation figure of 1.9, which we have applied for the last 10 years in that whole financial strategy, is never what we face as inflation, because of what we're dealing with is construction. And the construction inflation is far, far greater. We've seen it in the last 2 or 3 years at least. And that is what's impacting upon the need we have to address these big rate rises today. Waters is essential. We've got to continue with the Waiari plant. We have to continue with our wastewater upgrades at Timanga. We need to deal with stormwater upgrades ongoing because we are seeing heavier rainfall events. And in many ways, the whole issues around resilience and hazards, which are being required of us through our regional policy statement, where we are having to spend a lot more on that. Growth and transport planning, 1.5. Growth is not something we can stop. We cannot put a sign up at the top of the Kaimais, as some former councillors that I recall back in 2010 thought was the answer. People want to come and live here. We've seen it in the survey that Christine Jones referred to earlier. It's an attractive place to be. Our economy is growing. What we have to address is the need for housing in our area, and it's unfortunate we're going to have a lag of several years where we cannot meet the demand, and we've got to do all we can to do that and partner, I hope, with Kāinga Ora once it is fully empowered by the next bit of legislation to deliver some stuff for the city and the intensification we are embarking on through the Te Papa Peninsula. The old adage, growth pays for growth, actually got killed off around about 2012 in my recollection. It was very prominent in the first decade of this century, but we did realise that we are limited because we cannot allow for the way in which many of our projects escalate in cost, not because anybody didn't do a good job trying to figure out what they would cost, but because the prices just change over time, and we're always left with having to put ratepayer money in to top up things. The debt management is very important. And 5%, I think, as I've said earlier, is a reasonable contribution at this stage. It is a good contribution because there's no additional cost to it. It will help to bring those ratios down to the 230, around about the 235. And I do support that happening. The increase in the differential is, as has been pointed out by the figures we've seen today, essential. We have to keep the incremental change in that regard, keeping it reasonable. 0.1 is a reasonable step forward, I think. Yes, it will impact on our commercial properties, and particularly the big commercial properties. It's going to be a big increase in the port and other major commercial entities in our city. But it is really a very small increase when you look at where the other metro cities sit with 2.3 and higher. So I hope members will take that step. We will consult. We will do our best to get the message right, as we've been advised by Mr. Tutt from Priority 1, to make sure they understand they're going to get value for this, that we are serious about getting on with our roads, getting on with the housing provision which you need to make. And we have to make this decision today. I implore my colleagues that we are the only ones in the city that can make these important decisions. We will consult. I know someone suggested a referendum, but I don't know that that would give us the right result. We have to listen to the submissions that will come back to us when we finally go out with the draft. And we need to listen to the community, but we have to govern the whole city, and we must not capitulate to any one sector of the community. I am mindful of how many of our residents who are on fixed incomes and have high value properties and low income perhaps are going to be affected by this, but that cannot in itself be the only basis upon which we make a decision. They have not only options of downsizing, and in fact they could have probably a far better enjoyment of life with realising that capital and doing what many New Zealanders do, buy the camper van and off they go. But they also have options of reverse mortgages, which when you are talking about only having to raise perhaps $400 or $450 a year to handle the rate increase, it is never going to be a threat to their continuing to occupy the homes if they want to stay where they are. It's not going to blow out, even if interest rates go up, it's not going to blow out into a debt that would take them and have them kicked out of their homes in time. There are options for them. Families help them with those decisions. We must do what we see as the best thing for the city as a whole, and I believe that this resolution is the best thing to do now at this stage of a draft, where we can, I hope unanimously, I might be a little bit optimistic, but I hope at least by a good majority we will make this decision today. We have made discussion before together that we want to build a great city one decision at a time. This is one of the most important decisions we'll make, and our community is looking at us to see if we are going to lead. I appreciate Mayor Tembi Powell and how he has stepped into his new role as mayor and has been giving leadership to focus on building a great city and tackling the tough questions. So I hope, members, you will support this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Mayor Powell, do you wish to speak now or reserve?
No, now. Thank you, Chair, if I may. Thank you, Deputy. That's great to hear your thoughts on this. I too want to thank the staff, and I particularly want to thank Mayor Gary Webber in his absence, although I'm aware that he is watching us as we speak, together with the full crew of the Western Bay Plenty District Council clustered around a laptop screen. So thank you for being here, Gary. I also want to thank Nigel for you being here, the Chief Executive of Priority One, together with Matt Cowley, Chief Executive of the Chamber. And I think what it does is it exemplifies the partnerships that we are creating with our surrounding councils and with business and with, indeed, other parts of our community, all of whom make up residents of this great city. I also want to thank the councillors. This is never an easy debate, and it's not going to get any easier as the days go by, and I think we are showing, and I would like to think that we will continue to show a level of collegial understanding. We are philosophically at odds on a number of areas, but at the end of the day, I can put my hand on my heart and say that that all the councillors here have this city to heart, given their various philosophical positions, and it's those positions which we need to overcome. However, comments in the Bay of Plenty Times this morning that Tauranga must stop growth concern me desperately. One resident said that one writer at least said that current residents should not have to pay for the services of residents of the future. And while some may present this Trump-esque isolationist argument, and this further suggests, and I quote, "We are not obliged to accept people who want to move here from other places." The writer goes on to say, and is quoted, "I don't believe those people have got the right to destroy the standard of living for people who have lived here for years and years." Well, I would say to that person that there are two flaws with their argument. Number one is that this is Tauranga, not a fortified, walled city of ancient Europe. This is not old Rothenburg, Germany, and it's most certainly not old Assisi in Italy. This is Tauranga, New Zealand, and it's 2020. Not 1620. The second thing I'd like to say is that much of what we need to pay for is historical. Increasingly, I feel less like a mayor and more like the janitor, constantly sweeping up yesterday's mess due to visionless leadership and an abject lack of courage. Ladies and gentlemen, we are an amenity desert here. Halls that I used to attend in the mid-70s as a 13, 14 and 15-year-old, and may have been there during Larry's era 30 years before, are still the halls that we have so-called Friday night dances in, except we don't. We don't have Friday night dances anymore. Swimming pools that are so outdated they're not fit for purpose. A generation of children who are using amenities that are not fit for purpose and may end up on the streets as a consequence of it. And we know about gangs in this city. We absolutely know what happens here when we don't provide social enterprise, if you will, for younger people. The presentation by Paul Blair of Infrastructure New Zealand is essentially that which I campaigned on, which in broad terms was greater regional cooperation and with central government, cooperation with central government. This is a Western Bay of Plenty problem and a challenge that has been accepted by our regional partners. We are in this together. We need to be under no illusions that if Tauranga City can't contribute together with our partners, we will not get central government funding and support. We are going to grow, and the Deputy, I think, captured that really well. People will continue to come. We are a magnet city. We are a beautiful city. People want to live here. Not only do they want to live here, they want to bring their businesses here. Exemplified only just recently by Winston Wallboards, shifting to Tariko with a brand new state-of-the-art manufacturing and distribution facility. It's time we stop being rubbery-lipped about growth and drop the "I don't want my sleepy little village to change" tantrum. It's time for it to end. It is time for us to grow up. We, as Larry quite rightly said, have a duty as civic leaders to recognise and manage the growth together with our regional partners. This is our chance to step up on behalf of a strategically important city to New Zealand and to step up on behalf of current and future residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Other speakers? Councillor Avery.
I think it would be good to at least consider the minimum level of the staff recommendation. So I'd like to test an amendment for a debt management level of 7.5% as opposed to 5%.
Is there a seconder for that course of action? Seconded by Councillor Salisbury. Councillor Avery, you wish to speak to the amendment?
Yes, just picking up on what Larry said, we pay a lot for our staff. They're highly experienced and they've come up with a recommendation for us. I think at the very least we should consider that recommendation before we choose a lower rating level, because I think it's pretty clear that the big issues are going to come not this year, but next year and the following year. So I don't expect this amendment will get through, but I could be pleasantly surprised. So I think I will make my pitch, my main talk during this one, and then have less to say during the main body of the motion. So we find ourselves in a rock and a hard place as councillors that are reasonably newly elected. So we've come in and staff have said we need a 15 to 17% rate rise, not for swimming pools, not for amenity, but just so that we can build enough houses for people to live in. Right? So currently, even with the 17.6, next year we're not going to be able to deliver all the infrastructure that the city needs. And we can't close down growth, as people have rightly said, because if we don't build houses, people are still going to move here, retire here, and they're going to displace the people who can't afford their rent or can't afford to buy houses. So we find ourselves in an impossible situation, which is largely due to our funding model, right? So we heard it from Infrastructure New Zealand, and I should have actually asked Paul Blair what he'd be voting for if he was in our situation, because he seemed quite a clever bloke. We're seeing people in Maryvale, ratepayers, having to pay for infrastructure for people to move to Papamoa and the lakes from Auckland, right? And that's not entirely fair. The cost of us not putting up the rates is housing supply dwindles, rents go up, housing prices go up, And I suppose 2/3 of the population is on board with that because they're property owners, and every time capital values go up, they go wahoo. Meanwhile, our social housing register doubles in a year, so the number of people waiting to get into a house. So broadly, we've got the two big options, that put up rates a lot or keep rates low and hope that central government comes to the party earlier without us taking that first positive step. So like I said before, Mayor Powell, Mayor Webber have indicated that central government are willing to take that step with us and with our regional partners if we're willing to take a step. So that's largely why I'm willing to go down a higher rate proposal, so temporary pain for the utopia of regional cooperation, because that's where we need to get to. We can't rate our way out of this. The existing 56% rates increases over 3 years, that's unaffordable. And that doesn't include all the costs. And that's just for infrastructure, no amenity. When I think about my friend group, most people haven't bought their first house. Those that have, they've stretched themselves financially to get into a place. So an extra $6 a week of rates, that is a sacrifice, and that causes stress and some hardship. On the flip side, for those people paying rent, and my best friend earns just over 40 grand a year. After student loan, after taxes, that's about $575 a week take-home pay. When your rent is $500 a week, that doesn't leave anything for you, right? So people are having to move back in with their parents, with their kids, even if they don't like their step-parents, So seeing rent increases of another $150 over 3 years, that's completely unaffordable. That's going to push more people onto the streets. And even though it's unfair to someone in Maryvale having to pay rates to have those houses unlocked in Papamoa and the Lakes, I see that as the lesser evil in this instance. And I just bloody hope that Tembe and Gary can pull it off with central government. And Jacinda, if you're watching, we really need a lot of help here. So, no good options. With this motion that I've moved, that debt management, we can always reduce the rating burden later because we're not spending this extra 2.5% that I've moved. We're just putting it into the kitty to reduce our liabilities that we're already carrying. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Aubrey. Councillor Salisbury, do you wish to speak to the amendment? You can speak broader if you choose to now. I'm going to be relaxed about that.
Thank you. Like Jaco, I think I'll speak now and just speak once. So during the campaign, I didn't actually campaign around rates, and not because I wanted to put rates up, but because I did not have all the facts at that time to make a sound decision about it. So I didn't come into council with a predetermined rate amount, but with a real open mind to get as much information as I could about the state of our city, about the projected budgets that we had, and about the views of the community and the implications of leaving things out of our budgets. So we all know that our house prices are among the most unaffordable in the world. We understand one of those reasons is that there is not enough land zoned and housing supply is short. There isn't the infrastructure to supply that land, whether it be water, wastewater, transport options. And we are unique in a number of ways, one being our geography and the location of the new land areas we need zoned for housing. And it's not only growth, but our current networks are also in need of resiliency work, strengthening, expanding to accommodate those who live here now, not just those who are to come. So it's not only growth that drives our increased capital expenditure. So the work in front of us as a city over the next few decades is colossal. So for us to do what we can do to become more affordable for our residents and ratepayers, and also for us to have the amenities that bring that heart and soul and culture to our city, we need to increase council's revenue. Our major form of income, as we all know, is rates, but rates alone will not get the work done. But I believe it will set us on a trajectory that will allow for the other options to come in later and for those to partner with us in the work. But if we as a city don't do what we can do, how can we ask our regional and central government partners to do what only they can do for us? So increasing rates, as others have said, will not solve this. We do need the other funding options, but it is a crucial part of the solution. We need to strengthen our balance sheet position in this annual plan without laying an untenable burden on the lower value homes. So we do need to prioritise the work in front of us. We do need to be prudent with our debt reduction. We have been historically funding operational expenses out of debt, and we do need to collaborate and engage with our community. So I believe at this point, our community is best served by leaving the options in and allowing those in our community to tell us what is most critical to them over the next 12 months while we explore more robust funding options for the next 10 years. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Salisbury. Just for clarification, it may help the meeting. We're just plugging in the numbers to the wider resolution that the increase of 2%, was it 7 or 7.5 you were?
7.5.
7.5, thank you. That 7.5% would reflect the C, which is the recognise the rate increase would go up to from 12.6 to 15.1 in that calculation. Okay, so we're clear about that? I think yes, fantastic. Okay, I'm going to take the opportunity to speak to the amendment, given that it does affect the wider rating number, and also by speaking to the amendment does give me the opportunity to speak for a third time, should it be necessary. But look, folks, I want to tackle the myth, and it has been proven to be a myth today, that Tauranga residential ratepayers are not doing their bit, that they haven't stepped up, that they haven't been courageous or bold or been paying their fair share. Because the numbers that we've been presented today, the Clout-Robson TCC staff report, give a lie to that notion, okay? And we know Tauranga is now, at the present day, higher than Hamilton, Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin. And we're going to give Auckland a run for their money. This myth has been perpetuated over the years. We have, unfortunately, had a situation, I believe, where the minister, over years and over conversations with Mayor Webber and others, has been fed, in my view, the wrong analysis of Tauranga's rating situation. I've heard reports of conversations that have been had where Mayor Webber has had conversations talking about how Tauranga needs to significantly increase their rates because they're not doing our fair share relative to a rural council, the Western Bay of Plenty District Council. And I think it may not be in the best interest of regional cooperation, but when our partner comes in here and reinforces that myth and reinforces it to the government and the minister, he needs to be called on it, because our residential ratepayers will be paying the price for the perpetuation of that myth. Let's get it clear. Let's get it to the government. Tauranga residential ratepayers are more than doing their bit. Let's show some strong leadership on that aspect and not surrender to the myth. I think that we need to look at other options. I think we need to look at user fees and charges, the differential, as Councillor Baldock has had some discussion on in this motion, and also the CapEx. But I would also caution members that by adopting this resolution now, we're going down the road where we are going to start closing off the ability to have a conversation on the differential. If we pass this motion today, we are going down the road where we are closing off the opportunity to have our conversation with the business community on the differential. I don't think we should be doing that. I think we need to report back on all the levers, what different rates of differential would have an impact on our city and our balance sheet. I think we need to have that conversation. We haven't. We're light on information. We're not doing our governance duty if we pass this resolution. Thank you. Other speakers? Councillor Robson.
Yeah, speaking to the amendment, and I suppose partially in reply to the mover, I think there are some misunderstandings about how cities work and what councils do. Generally speaking, councils in New Zealand do not build houses. What we do is we free up land on which developers and builders build houses. But we don't control land supply, right? That's not within our gift. One of the biggest issues we have in New Zealand with regard to housing is the provision of affordable housing. There is no evidence that Tauranga City Council freeing up land supply for developers to control the onward supply to the market will in any way address housing affordability in the city for those 40% of people who currently can't get into their own housing. Yeah, the people, if you like, not within the property market already. And central government has a big role to play in that, a role they abdicated in New Zealand in about the mid-80s and have never stepped back into. There is a discussion about our relationship with central government. I think the regional in the cooperation argument is overplayed. I think if people read the Infrastructure New Zealand report, it is an issue about restructuring local government, and it calls government, central government, to account. That's why I enjoyed reading it so much. Paul made the very point in this chamber that central government in this country has no vision for Aotearoa New Zealand, none. And the idea that we produce visions that sort of mesh with nothing sort of shows the futility of our position. We are playing a game, in inverted commas, a very serious game. But all the rules are set by central government. The Local Government Act is a product of central government. Our debt constraints are a product of central government. In 2004, we worked closely with central government. The Joint Officials Group produced a detailed paper identifying the infrastructure requirements of this city and the rest of the Western Bay. They put together an analysis, detailed analysis of the numbers that were required to provide the infrastructure for what was then, 15, 16 years ago, an area facing exactly the same problems it faces now. Growth coming, infrastructure under threat, financial positions of councils under pressure. The promises made by central government in that Joint Officials Group agreement were never kept. And my concern at the moment, and I appreciate the good heart of those people who are talking to government, but my concern is I'm looking for more than the second-hand assurances from a group who have repeatedly let this country, the regions, and the communities down. I refer earlier to the comments by Councillor Arbery about an MOU. We've had talk about the Waikato Agreement. Yeah? I want to see something from central government. Now, I'm prepared to open the conversation, and that's what we're doing here, I believe, in terms of, if you like, considering the rates increases for our community over and above what they should be facing, because, as someone's pointed out, previous decisions haven't served our community well. As the chair's pointed out, the part of the community they didn't serve was the residential ratepayer. They served the business people of this city extraordinarily well. As a matter of fact, if I was responsible for an organisation who was promoting small to medium enterprises, I would be grateful to the decisions of Tauranga City Council, because the members of my organisation have not been paying their share for years. They've been getting a bit of a free ride. However, the chickens have come home to roost. Now those people are facing a city where they can't get their goods around, where their staff can't afford to live. Karma is a unfortunate thing. So what I'm looking for is evidence that central government are really in this, right? In that regard, I think that the substantive motion at the minute goes well far enough. I think it's up for debate whether that goes too far. But in terms of the amendment, I see no reason to over-egg the commitment pudding to send a message to government that we understand the need to work with them. What I'm looking for is a clear, unadulterated, direct message to the people of the city from central government that they get it. And at the moment, even Mr. Blair was kind enough to point out that he's not 100% certain that they do. Talk is good. Rhetoric is entertaining. But at the end of the day, show me the money. Jack.
Further speakers to the amendments? Councillor Clout and then Councillor
Thank
Baldock.
you. I noticed that most of the speeches have not really addressed the amendment, so I'm just going to stick to that, and then I'll get to my substantive point. I think, Councillor Robson does make a point that, I think the substantive motion is already going far enough, and so to me, another 2.5%, it's called a debt management levy, but I've always referred to it as a debt enablement levy because effectively it enables council to borrow more, and that is something that, I am cautious about. So I'll be voting against the amendment, and then I'll be talking more about in the substantive part. Thank you.
Other speakers to the amendment? Councillor Baldock.
Yes, to the amendment. First of all, I think the speeches that Councillor Arbery and Councillor Salisbury made were very, very good, and I am heartened by the new blood we have on our council at this stage and their courage to step up and support some very difficult decisions. First-term councillors usually are very cognizant of, their votes and so on, and I think they're being very brave. It's good because they'll be around when I depart, because according to the Mayor, I'm 30 years older than he is, so I must be going very soon. But look, along with some other councillors, 1 year ago we moved a motion to have a 4% debt management levy. Councillor Clout, Councillor Mason, former Councillor Mason and Malloy and myself. So I'm very happy that at least we're passing a 5% one today. I would have gone with more, but I think some of the information we have now about the IFF, the SPVs, the things that are developing may help us to solve that. And we need to wait for the LTP discussion before we take the rate any further. But it doesn't in any way mean that this problem's gone away. We're going to have to see in a year's time just how we can address the continuing problems with our debt ceiling.
Councillor Hughes speaking to the amendment.
I'm just going to speak to the amendment in that I think in this financial year we're in a kind of we're at a turning point, and there's a lot more work we need to do to get our other funding avenues up and running, and I think at this stage 5% gives us some wriggle room to work with rather than going too far before we've enabled some of those other channels. So I'm happy to stick with the 5%.
Thank you. Final call for speakers to the amendment. Mayor Powell.
I'd just like to respond to one particular issue. I think it's very germane. And I'll just respond to Councillor Robson. I agree, rhetoric is interesting and talk is cheap. However, what we have done since inauguration was to constantly forge a positive relationship with central government, whether it's via NZTA, whether it's via ministers, cabinet ministers themselves. That's what has been done. As a consequence of that, and to your point, what can we see that's tangible around that right now is an MOU with the Minister, with Minister Twyford at Smart Growth. Now, that would not have happened had those relationships not been forged.
Thank you. I'll now put the amendment. All those in favour, please raise your... No right to reply to amendment. All those in favour, please raise your hand and say aye. That's Councillor Arbery, Councillor Salisbury. All those against, please raise your hand. Councillor Morris, Baldock, Robson, Hughes, Granger, Clout, Kitty, Hollis, Mayor Powell. The amendment is lost. We'll go back to the substantive motion. I believe we've had Councillor Baldock speak, Mayor Powell speak, and Councillor Arbery, do you wish to speak to the substantive motion now?
Just looking at this table that we've been given, and on here it says that under the substantive motion that Larry's passed, that passed, sorry, yeah. The top 1% of, or the highest value properties would have a residential rates increase of $26 a week. And while that seems quite high, that is half of what the rental average rent cost per week is. And that's not by our richest 1%, that's by our poorest 40% who can't get onto the property ladder. So I just want to keep in mind that this whole conversation is always dominated by the ratepayers and the property owners, but everyone always forgets about the 40% who are bearing the real cost of our housing shortage, right? So we have a housing emergency. I do believe getting more land supply online, getting more houses built, actually does reduce the price of houses. Well, if you get enough. And potentially only for the middle class if we don't get Kāinga building some social houses. But I don't think our ratepayers, I'm obviously naive and young, but if we went out with this substantive motion, if we explained to the ratepayers that, yes, this is $26 a week for the top 1%, or $0 a week, or $2 a week extra for the bottom quartile, I think they'd be willing to pay that, knowing that their neighbours, the 40% who are having to pay 50% or $50 a week extra in rent, wouldn't have to bear that extra cost. So I think that's something we should ask the community about, rather than us making this in isolation. Because this is still a draft, we are going to consult on this. It would have been nice to consult on a higher figure, but so be it.
Thank you, Councillor Aubrey. Speaking to the substantive motion, that's the only thing we're speaking to now, Councillor Clout.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Look, nobody likes to come here around this table and suggest a 12% rate increase more. And certainly through my time on council, I have, you might say, promoted, certainly in some of my campaigns. I've had 3 campaigns. 2 of them I did campaign for the rates cap for the residential ratepayer. And so I find myself in a conundrum here, because if business was usual, that's what I would be proposing. But business is not as usual right now. We've just had massive increases in capital projects, skyrocketing costs, which really have to be borne by the wider community. We have a massive investment to be made in infrastructure, primarily roading, transportation, and the 3 waters. We've got a massive amount to invest in our resilience program, recognising effects of climate change, whether you believe it or not. We have to prepare for it as a council, and these are hugely costly exercises. At the same time, I want to see a reasonable amount of investment in social infrastructure and amenities. And certainly we haven't really mentioned that much at all in this conversation, because we know that we don't have that much sort of spare to put into those areas. But things like upgrading the Greerton swimming pool, the Adams High Performance Centre, and continuing and looking at feasibility of a memorial park development. These are all things which I think the city certainly will appreciate going forward. So, but that's been, as I say, very much a sort of a secondary topic for discussion. Look, nobody likes to know that we are effectively the highest rated metro council in the metro in New Zealand, in metros. And so that's something that I was perturbed about when I put these figures together last night. But it was actually good to at least know where we are starting from. And so, but even though that is the case, I'm not afraid of perhaps going out on more of a limb for the sake of the future generations of the city by increasing the rates by more than the cap. I'm pleased to see that the lower UAGC will provide a certain amount of relief, particularly to those that are more hard done by in our community. So I think we are making a move in the right direction, and also by edging the commercial differential up as well, we are helping those at the lower end. We've seen today already through the NZIER report that we face massive shortages of housing, and that's going to have huge flow-on effects if we don't address it here and now. And so what we're doing today, and I believe we will get this passed, is setting ourselves up for a more solid foundation for the future. I definitely want to hear back from the community. You know, we've got actually pages and pages of projects, capital projects in particular, and also operational expenditure, which I really implore the people of Tauranga to go through with a fine-tooth comb. Maybe most people have never even considered putting a submission into council, but now is a really good opportunity to do that and to say, well, you know, I agree with this line, I don't agree with that line, please come in and we will hear you. And at that point, we can then make any necessary adjustments to our final budget. Between now and then, we've got about 2 or 3 months where, as elected members and executive, we need to be going through this more with a fine-tooth comb than we have had the chance to up to this point, but I'm sure we're all up for that discussion. And finally, we're setting ourselves up for a huge long-term plan discussion in the next 12 to 15 months. And I'm very pleased that our financial situation is very much in the forefront of the local news. And I think what it'll mean is that the overall community will have a chance, and they need to take their chance to discuss with us and with each other the long-term vision for the city. And so I welcome this proposal. Thank you.
Councillor Kitty.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I just want everybody here to know how much I love the city. My husband and I raise our 3 children along with our extended families and friends, and we all want the best for this community. It is also part of the community that voted me in to advocate and engage with and for them. I too want all the big tick on all these amazing projects on this list, but we also must be realistic about what is achievable and what's not. We can all see the financial state that our council was in, and obviously it's not great. So let's get back to the basics first and restore confidence back into our community that when we start a project, it won't go millions over budget, as has been seen in the past. A major rates increase affects many groups in our Tauranga Moana. 20% are over 65 years old. And I know that the press release last week, our deputy said that if people can't afford the rates rise, or increases, then sell up and downsize. However, I hold a lot of compassion for our current and ageing population, who have raised us, worked hard, and deserve a little more respect. A lovely lady with her 2 children turned up to my door on Monday night, telling me that her and her husband are on fixed incomes. They work hard and they prioritise raising good, socialised, resilient children. They budget well, and they said the proposed high rates will drastically affect their children's education and sporting activities and their ability to provide for their family. And they don't want to be forced to sell their family home. We also talk about social housing issues, exorbitant house and rental prices. So how will our renters feel about a potential $30 to $50 a week rise? How will this help our low-income earners? I don't want our community to feel betrayed by our new council. We've got enough going on, especially with the coronavirus causing economic uncertainty nationally and globally. So I think it's time for us to leave our already highest rates in New Zealand alone. Reset as a city. Set our vision with our community. Let's engage with them to achieve this. Focus on getting the basics right, like planning for our infrastructure, help for our homeless, and definitely looking at community events and amenities like the memorial pool and other council businesses and buildings. I actually personally felt a little blackmailed by our regional and central government stand, as surely they would want to help us succeed and thrive as a city. A strong community is built on solid foundations. So let's prioritise this. Let's engage with our people, let's engage with our community to define the best solution for us all. Let's put the community back into this council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kitty. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. just written down a few things. This year's annual plan is a reflection of the ongoing work in our organisation is doing to respond to the growth in our city, and I really applaud the enormous amount of work that's gone on behind the scenes to get us to this place. There is growth in population in our country and in the world, and it is obvious right now that we have the level of unaffordability in our city that is untenable for us and our community not to look seriously at this growth and help to manage what it takes with infrastructure to accommodate that. But there is also massive growth in the port, and I believe that this and the associated industries are the big elephant in the room. All signs point to our port taking on much of the load of the Auckland port should it close. I ride my bike past massive polluting industrial businesses who are compromising our harbour, past trucks lined up with commuters stuck in cars on our roads, ships lined up that run their dirty fuel for the whole time they're in port, and containers are stacked higher and higher in front of our beautiful harbour that we all love and cherish. We have just chaperoned in a massive industrial business into Tauriko, which has no strong transport corridor, and now have a capital project on our annual plan budget to accommodate this extra traffic it will create. By their own admission, this organisation will bring over half of their staff from out of town, so the pressure on our already obvious housing shortage is like a conveyor belt. People are packing out houses and moving into cars and eventually out onto the street. We have chaperoned in one of the biggest truck depots in New Zealand and located them off State Highway 29, where their thousands of weekly trucks will not be able to access the overpass currently being built at a price of $120 million, and will instead join the congestion underneath our local roads, where we just put in $1 million to ensure that we have an underpass so our communities do not have to cross at grade with these trucks. A look at the OPEX at the outside, on our OPEX at the outside organisations that we support currently, who are being set, that we are being set up, new business that most of our outside support to organisation is for organisations that are supporting new businesses to come into our city, and we have no strategic plan as to where these should go, and we should be encouraging, and what we should be encouraging based on what our communities say they want. We give $5,000 in contrast to the One Business Network, who works for the better environmental income for our businesses, and we give zero to any of the environmental organisations. We give them more than $1 million to sports organisations, but barely anything to organisations supporting youth at risk and our most vulnerable. Our vital signs are showing already reports that our community appreciate their relationship to nature, the environment, the landscape, the beach, their families, the outdoors. They say protect our green spaces, natural environment, our reserves, our beaches, our harbour and our trees. In option 1 and 2 of the draft annual plan, we were prepared to put our cycle action plan on notice. It has been put in the category of a nice to have, and it could just be kicked down the road if those 2 options were chosen. So I think it's time to reframe what we're talking about when we talk about a cycle action plan. What we're actually talking about is healthy streets and the livability of our streetscapes. The cycle action plan budget, which creates an inevitable backlash from people who cannot see themselves as part of a cycling community, actually includes pedestrian crossings, shared paths, treescapes, and a better access for all for our pedestrians. I think we need to reframe what we're talking about in terms of cycling, and it needs to be a wider context in terms of livability and living streets for our communities when we go out to consult on this annual plan. I believe that the work that we're doing around UFTI and our Transport Alignment Project is vital, and that it needs to be strong enough to give our businesses the faith that we have a strong plan for our transport network. I would like to see bold conversation with our regional partners around sharing the direct costs to our community from the port and the businesses associated with it. And I believe we need to see that strong conversation with government about what our port looks like in the future and what that means for our whole future network transport strategy, port strategy, and what kind of help we need as a city to ensure that we don't bear the brunt of the costs for what that port means for our transport network in terms of rail and transport corridors. For the next long-term plan, we need to be in a position where we have enough support through other funding mechanisms to cater for our growth in order for us to get back to what the community want, in order to be proud and happy and healthy and living in the city that they live in. I support this motion for this annual plan so that we can get all the necessary costs that our organisation have deemed we need to enable us to work towards what we need to be done this year, in order so that we can have the bigger conversations as to how that looks going forward for our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. I'll speak to the substantive motion now, and I'll end where I began with the Probus meeting of some 70 people over at the Mount earlier on this week. Some of those people were also on fixed incomes, and that's been raised by Councillor Kitty in debate. And I want you to consider, colleagues, that many of them may only be faced with a 1.9% increment in their living allowance, 1.9%, and you're proposing to hit them with a 12.6% rate increase. When you have more cost added than you have additional income, you are faced with a stark choice. What do I do without? And I would hope, and I believe, that you will all have the courage to engage with those people, to converse with them frankly, to explain to them who are deciding what to do without this coming year, so that we can fulfil your vision. In that room, there were people who were naturally concerned, very concerned in fact. They just wanted somebody, a group of people, perhaps a council, to stand up for them. We're not doing that today. We're actually surrendering to the myth I referred to before. The myth that Tauranga is not doing its part. We've adopted the myth, we've bowed down to it, and we've refused to have faith in the facts. I believe that this council, by doing this, passing this resolution, is betraying the trust that was put in it by the community just 4 months ago. I was in Jerusalem last month, and whilst I didn't come down with Jerusalem syndrome, you can look up that on Wikipedia later, I did have time to reflect on something called sins of omission and sins of commission. So broadly, what does that mean? If you deliberately tell a lie, for argument's sake, that's wrong. If you deliberately withhold the truth, that's also as good as a lie. Now, I don't believe for 1 second that anybody around this table, and I've seen no evidence of it, told a lie to the community in their speeches. I've listened to all of your speeches carefully during the campaign, and I think that every word was honest. I do. And I think that on that basis, we collectively were elected. But I just invite you to consider whether the sin of omission is coming into play here. I know there were several colleagues who made comments around constraining rates rises, and numbers were put out there. How many of you had the courage to stand in front of our community 4 months ago and tell them that they'd be up for a 12.6% rate rise? How many? Where was the honesty? Well, not the honesty, but where was the boldness and the courage then? Personally, didn't see it. I think that is one of the reasons, the sin of omission generally in New Zealand amongst local politicians, is why we have such a low turnout, because we break faith with our community shortly after an election by doing an action just like this. I'd also say that I think the members are failing in their governance duty to look at all the options. We are not looking at user fees and charges, the differential, the capital budgets as forensically as our fiduciary duty requires. We are failing in our governance duty today. I leave you with that sombre warning, and I do now call any of the following councillors, if they wish to make comment. We have only space for Councillor Bill, Councillor John and Councillor Andrew, and of course there would be a right of reply with Councillor Baldock Are there any other speakers before I move to right of reply? Councillor Hollis.
Just to stop feedback coming. Look, after a number of years of multi-million dollar operational deficits and lots of projects completed with enormous overspend, and now we've just received a capital expenditure budget in the future of hundreds of millions, we're now being asked to take even more ratepayer money, and possibly only to impress external agencies that we have enough skin in the game. Should we work with and listen to those external agencies? Of course, yes, but to be held over a barrel, no. I actually dislike that kind of thinking. That's not productive. Regardless of the outcome today, I would hope that other funding levers and options would be first investigated rather than first dipping into the ratepayer's pocket. And after reading the Clout report today, why on earth should Tauranga also be the most expensive metro council in New Zealand for residential rates? For good governance to occur, we need to have confidence in data and information, that zero-based budgeting is occurring or has recently occurred, that excellent risk and project management processes are in place and functioning, and that there's a very clear strategic direction. And I may have missed one or two, but that'll do for now. There are hundreds of projects that are necessary to build a vibrant community that we have on our list. And when completed, this city would be amazing. But if a project can be shown to be able to wait, then it must wait until we can afford it, or at least until we have confidence in our funding options and capital spending processes. Again, asking the ratepayer to dig ever deeper may well be just to show our regional partners we are prepared to break the piggy bank to help. Surely they would be far more impressed were we to solve why we cannot afford to look after the basics in our city. Surely our regional partners would prefer that we could manage risk better and get projects completed on time and on budget before trusting us with larger regional projects. Disregard of these consequences without ensuring the basics are done is poor governance. Perhaps the high rate rise proposed is a sunk cost fallacy, or in other words, throwing good money after bad. Just as an aside, and just recently, former ANZ Chief Economist Cameron Bagri said one of the likely results of the coronavirus is a large impact on retailing, hospitality and travel. It is not sensible to overspend, overcommit, or to put significant extra strain on households and businesses that may come into serious stress from external forces. Anyway, now we need to adjust, reset and understand, and then find the pathway through the risks that face us as a city before we leap into enormous nice-to-have projects and show we are not going to stuff up any more capital projects, and definitely before we heavily dip into our ratepayers' pockets. Bravery and courage is standing firm when the world is in chaos. It is not capitulating to external forces, and it's not buckling under pressure just to virtue signal, and it is not taking money from the 20% or so of fixed income folk who are struggling already just to live in this city. We definitely should not be thinking ever that a resident must sell their house just to survive. And I won't be supporting this rates rise today, and I hope that my colleagues think of the unintended consequences of their decision today.
Thank you, Councillor Hollis. Councillor Robson.
I made mention earlier of rhetoric. I think it's interesting, and I hope the media are going through the matrix based on the movement to the differential of 1.3 and to a UAGC of 10%. We're currently looking at a median rates rise for residential, as I understand it, of 8%, if I'm reading the table correctly, or roughly $4 per week. Right, so I think some balance in the conversation. I don't want to see headlines in the paper that reflect some of the rhetoric that's been used around massive rates rises, because that's clearly over-egging the pudding. However, in my eternal quest to find balance between the loud voices that I'm generally surrounded by, I also appreciate the comments that have been made that we haven't yet done our due diligence. There are levers we are not looking at for whatever reason. We haven't gone through the CapEx. This group has not collectively gone through the CapEx lines. And I'm sort of minded of the words of Gary Weber about picking the numbers that suit our position rather than looking at the numbers to inform our position, the hoary old line about people using numbers the way a drunk uses a lamppost more for support than illumination comes to mind. We need to look further at the numbers. My understanding is the commitment will be we will not stop looking at the numbers on the passing of whatever resolution we pass today. And I urge us to stay true to that. Yeah, we have 168 hours in every week for the next 3 months. We need to use that time wisely for sleep, for eating what we need, and for considering the best interests of the city going forward. It's very, very important. That being the case, my view is we haven't got the information in front of us that we needed. One of my newer colleagues, and I won't embarrass them, had an expectation that there would be a matrix. I had a similar expectation. We shared an expectation, the old and the new, looking at the same problem with the benefit of an education and some ability in numbers and saying there's a matrix of options that should be in front of us. That hasn't been provided. And the idea that we can put faith and just work with what the staff recommend, while noble and very, very generous, needs at least some nuancing. Do I need to remind people that the staff recommendation was we don't look at the differential? Check the report. And it's only the good work by Councillor Clout, author of the Clout Report, forever be known as, that opened our eyes to a reality that the report didn't provide us insight into, and has resulted in, I'm pleased to see, Councillor Baldock accepting, I think by my inference, that the differential needed to be sort of looked at more strongly. But there's a balancing here. While the headline for our residential ratepayers is better than some would write it, the news for our business people is not good. But that is a legacy of past decisions, failures of the business representatives of the city to honestly articulate the situation and to show the sort of commitment that we are now being collectively asked to show vis-a-vis central government. There is an irony in being lectured by business people, those very people that have let this community down so badly for so long. My view at the moment is the matter should lie on the table. The matrices should be provided. Under the changes to the Local Government Act last year, we can come back within a week. Those matrices should be available within a week, and we can then make an informed decision. I don't think Councillor Baldock's motion is far from the starting point that this journey needs at the moment, but I don't feel I've been given the information that I am entitled to receive as a reasonable expectation to inform the decision I'm being asked to make today. So I will be voting against the substantive motion, but I would like to see us back in here within 5 working days with the necessary information in front of us, and therefore I would ask that should the motion fail, the Chair adjourn the meeting so that we can easily reconvene and address this matter in a considered and informed way. We're short of that at the moment.
Councillor Granger, do you wish to speak?
Button in some more words here. 12.6% rates increase, and we all spoke, and many have, as regards to being one of the highest rate paying cities in New Zealand. Scares you, doesn't it? First of all, the perception of the community out there, this is what they do say, and they will say, the hell is this council going to spend on this time? Are they going to give us projects we don't really want? Are they going, again, to make some blunders as they've done in the past? I can mention many of those. Durham Street blowout from 6 to 10, Phoenix Park, Greeton Roading, and there's many more. And can you blame them? I can't. So first of all, I feel we've got to look very carefully again at our capital expenditure. I think we need to ferret through those again. There is some more that we can pull our reins back on. But beside those issues, we all know that the growth in Tauranga, it's there, very, very hard to stop. And again, the paper, as Tenby said before, many of the community would like it to stop. But should you? And could you? A growing city it is. It's one of the fastest in New Zealand. The major costs, and people don't realise this, that when you have a growing city to this extent, the major costs lie in the likes of water treatment stations, water reservoirs. They're the major costs, and of course all the infrastructure attached to that as well. And not only that, your roading and your transport. Local bodies a few years ago, even when I was here, and I used to say growth pays for growth. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't now. We know that. Central government, where the hell are they? I wish our local MPs was sitting here with some of the community, but they're not. The partnership with central government, what partnership? What partnership? It's just non-existent. And aside from that, in central government, where's our partnership with our regional council, who owns a big, massive share, don't they, of our port over here? The more I think about that, maybe we should leaning and stretching our arms to their pockets, because that port is growing just like this city. And that's scary too, and that people forget. When a port grows to this size and be bigger, they need more transport to the port. Who pays for that? Central government in the past many times have told this local body here in Tauranga, you must produce more areas for housing. More must be built. Yeah, and who pays for it? We as governors here, I just think today and tomorrow we've got to put one hell of a lot more weight on our central government. And Tenby, I'm glad you've come back. And what I've seen you do and just in the near past, I think you'd be the ideal leader to do that, to place a lot more weight. And that's what we have to do, because the councils that I've been involved with have not. And I think you'd be the good leader to help make that happen. So as far as this motion, look, I'm sorry, I'm not going to support it. And I just feel, and just something Councillor Robson said there before, let's just lie this on the table. It needs further discussion, and that's what I'd support. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Councillor Bill. Councillor Baldock, do you wish to exercise the right of reply?
Strangely enough, I do.
Okay.
I'll have to be quick though. There's so many excellent speeches been made and comments that I will cover. Mayor Tenby, first of all, I appreciate your leadership and vision in this chamber, and the speech you made was very, very good. And your relationship with central government and with our partners is crucial to achieving things. It is a breath of fresh air to hear vision and boldness and courage here. I have sat here for many years and be absolutely sick and tired of just complaining and complaining and complaining, which some members have continued to do today. We know central government does not help us as they ought to, but we get nowhere when we simply sit here and harp on about what central government should do. We must get on and do the job we have been elected to do, which is to build this city and to take care of it, everybody in it, as best we can. Councillor Clout, you said, you know, these pages, these lines, they are very important. I have been through them, and I could not find anything I wanted or could seriously, in my responsibilities, take out. The community can go through it, and if they come in here and ask us to reduce rates, I hope they've come with a list of things that they will do without. because as far as I can see in that list, we need it all, and we need even more than what is there currently. Councillor Hughes, you did a very good job with the passion for the cycle action plan and many other good things. We have had a clear message from NZTA. We don't begin to fund that, and it's going to take 10 years to build. We will not get the subsidy we need from the government, and if we don't have that, we won't be building it because the community won't support funding it on its own. Councillor Morris, what can I say? I have the courage to tell those people at Probus, I don't know if you did, but they have no option but to face up to the reality of their situation. It is not only to sell their houses and downsize. They have reverse mortgage options. They have other things. We will do what we can to lobby central government for an increase in the rates rebate that can help them. But if we don't make the right decision today, and this speaks to what Councillor Kitty has raised also, what will happen is that sewage will spill into the harbour. They won't turn on their tap and get fresh water all the time. There will be an increased number of water restrictions, and the flooding in the city is going to increase and get worse. Is that the kind of city they want for the sake of $20 or $30? Well, it won't even be that for them, but you know, for a reasonable amount of increase. We have to all face the pain of it and get on with building a great city. We have the 5th largest city, we have the fastest growing city, and we have the 4th smallest territorial authority. Those are huge challenges, and that's why it costs more. That is probably why we have high residential rates. But people look at the overall rate taken in the city. That is what the government is looking at. That's what our partners are looking at. They won't accept our slicing of the numbers in a particular way to try and justify us not having the courage to make the decision I believe we are going to make here. Councillor Robson, you are in an eternal quest for numbers, and it shall never stop. Today we have to make a decision. The idea that we could leave it on the table and wait till next week won't stop your quest. Make a decision today to do what we need to do. We won't stop working, I agree with you. We'll have to keep going through these in the next 3 months, not just wait until the submissions come in. We need to be doing our work in the meantime. But let's make the decision today that we know what is right to do and go out to the community to consult as we have been asked to do and tasked to do by the election 4 months ago. Councillor Hollis, at some point I hope you will give up this rhetoric of the great overspends and the waste and so on. Most of what we spend our money on is very well spent. Yes, we have mistakes. Yes, things happen where things don't turn out, like Durham Street, not because of a major blowout of somebody wasting things, but it's what we found under the ground. We all know that, and yet we still go out with these headlines about overspends. And we are the council. Let us become the council and make the decision we need to make today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. The right of reply being exercised, we will now move to the vote. All those in favour of the resolution, please say aye and raise your hand. That's Councillor Baldock, Councillor Aubrey, Salisbury, Hughes, Clout and Mayor Powell. Those against, please raise your hands. It's Councillor Morris, Robson, Granger, Kiddy and Hollis. I declare the motion carried. Thank you. Colleagues, congratulations to the colleagues that won that debate. We will now break for 10 minutes and then we will come back to consider the submission to the infrastructure funding and finance bill, and we'll also just quickly pass the NZIER report, which we had the presentation on before. Thank you, colleagues. We'll adjourn for 10 minutes. the meeting. We have received the impact on housing shortage for Tauranga City, the NZIER report. We had the presentation earlier on. And the recommendation before us is to receive that report. Can I have a mover for that course of action? Moved by Councillor Arbery, seconded by Councillor Kiria. Is there anybody who wants to speak to that? No? I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against and carried. Moving to 7.3, the submission on our infrastructure funding and, not ours, the submission on the infrastructure funding and financing bill. Very important given the conversations we've just had in the chamber. Fraser Smith, would you present that report to us?
Right, I'll keep this pretty short because I know you've got other things to get back to. So really overall, I just wanted to say Council supports this bill. It's helpful for us in the situation that we're in. It's also a natural progression from the discussions that we've been having with central government ever since the Housing Infrastructure Fund and through the CIP model that they've used up in Auckland. So it's another extension of what's been happening for the last few years. And it's just the next step in the process. And we have been working quite closely with the Crown and the other key growth councils in terms of some of the development of this bill and that sort of stuff. It's working in the right direction. It is not a silver bullet. It's realised that, but it is a positive step. I think as mentioned further before, it's sort of another tool in the toolkit. I have had a look at a couple of the other reports, the similar reports being put forward by other councils. One of the things that they actually did mention that is not in the report is just to highlight that there are some ratepayer safeguards in there as well, in terms of there is a set maximum amount that the levy can collect over time, and there is also a provision that when the minister is actually deciding on whether to put a levy in place or not, he must consider the financial impact and that sort of stuff on the levy payers. So there is that consideration built into the Act as well, and there's disclosure requirements coming through, which we've said could be a bit improved, but there are definitely disclosure requirements so that the levy payers will actually know what they're heading for. And also to say this is another step in the process, and we are continuing to work with the other growth councils and central government to carry on with next steps and things like that, so there's still more stuff happening in the background. So I don't know if anyone had any questions.
Questions from colleagues. Councillor Baldock, then Robson.
Yeah, Fraser, thanks for that. The paragraph or the subparagraph made D about the government support package is I find very interesting. Am I correct to understand that, you know, one of the problems we have is with cost overruns and we don't get it back in DC. So this is going to address that issue, and they will carry the can for that? Yeah,
Correct. That is the intention of the government support program would be put in place, and if there was huge cost blowouts in terms of over and above the ability, what was originally set as the maximum charge, which does include a contingency, but yes, if that got blown out, then the government support package would be expected to pick that up. And the same around the refinancing risks in terms of, because you're talking 30 to 50 years, there's like debt have to be refinanced. The Crown support package would also pick up that sort of risk.
Won't get passed on to the ratepayer or the new ratepayers?
Not if the Crown, not under the Crown support package, no.
And if they've allowed themselves a contingency, maybe they might give us one in the DCs, which would be very helpful going forward.
Councillor Robson.
I have read the report, but again, most people won't. And I understand there has been some work done on the sort of off our balance sheet modelling by our staff. For the purpose of indicating to people what the likely impost of this alternative type funding might be, have we got a number we could give the public in terms of, say, what, in a Milldale's type situation, the additional annual cost would be for funding the infrastructure in somewhere like Tutumu? So would that be in the order of, $1,200 a year on their rates, or would it be or would it be significantly, do we have anything? Because people are talking about the off-balance sheet thing, but I'm hearing different numbers, and I think people have to understand that quite often these financing options are not funding options. In other words, just because we get into a situation where the government finances it, the funding still has to be paid for possibly by the residential property owners. So do we have some numbers we can share?
Yep. The best thing I can offer you right off the top is if you look at page 133, Appendix C in there, I've done some modelling around the sort of funding that you might get in relation to Te Tumu. And that I've based on the fact there's about $1,100 and an $1,100 per year charge going up at 3% per year, and which would be approximately 50% of rates. So, and if you double that, obviously 100% of rates, but that's giving you a maximum of around $75 million worth of investment into Te Tumu.
But how much investment do we need into Tumu?
We need about $300 million is the council investment as a rough order figure.
So effectively, if I multiplied that $1,100-1,200 a year by 4, that would give me some idea of the funding cost that would have to be picked up. How does that work?
That's what we've suggested is that 50 to the 100% would be the maximum that you could realistically, for affordability, put in through this sort of activity, and therefore we would still have to charge development contributions or some similar measure to actually collect the rest. And other councils have also done a calculation and come up with similar sort of ranges. We don't expect that what you would charge through this levy will necessarily recover all of the costs, and you would still need to use development contributions to collect the balance.
If I could just add to that, this is what we're referring to earlier in the sense that it's not a silver bullet and it won't actually take everything off. There, fundamentally, with the current IFF model, there'll be two restrictions. One is its application to citywide infrastructure will have some restriction around it. The second is from that affordability perspective, it will not be able to actually take the full amount. And Milldale, in fact, still has a development contribution component to Milldale, and there's that was set at $1,000 in terms of from an affordability lens. So that goes to the point that there isn't a silver bullet. It won't be the whole fix, but it's one thing that we really want to get across the line to help.
Additional questions?
Happy to move.
Thank you. The recommendations are that we endorse the draft submission, moved by Councillor Baldock, seconded by Councillor Robson. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Baldock?
Just briefly, as Councillor Robson's questions have opened up, this is not a silver bullet. It may help, but I'm so pleased that we're not relying upon this entirely, and that we did pass the previous resolution, so that we are approaching this with all of the levers we may possibly be able to use to meet our needs.
Councillor Robson, seconded. Do you wish to speak?
It's nice to end on a note of shared view. It isn't a silver bullet. It is helpful to a point, but someone has to pick up the funding, and I think that's the issue we face. Continually we have this conversation where people talk about financing, but ultimately if this city is going to grow, then the beneficiaries of that growth have to pay. And I do believe, and it's not whinging, it's just a statement of financial inevitability. Ultimately, if the governments of New Zealand continue to hold the policy settings they hold, with regard to taxation, with regard to immigration, right, then the funding model for councils is broken, which is where we started this conversation. And giving us some tools to reduce some of it just kicks the can down the potholed road. And that's not where we want to be.
Any further speakers to the resolution? Right of reply, Councillor Baldock. I will now put the resolution. All those in favour, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Councillor Morris, Baldock, Arbery, Salisbury, Robson, Hughes, Granger, Clout, Kitty, Hollis, Mayor Tebby Powell. I declare the motion carried. That is the end of business today. There are no late items, so I declare the meeting closed. I'd like to give my heartfelt thanks to our staff for the work they've done, including the real-time information that's been provided. Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleagues for the manner in which they conducted the robust debate, And I'd like to thank our CCO friends for being here, the media, and most of all, our committee advisor, Raj. Thank you very much.
Well done, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your leadership of the meeting.